Hi, welcome to eDay1. In your Schoology folder, you will find an e-learning Conics Unit 9. And we are right now going to be in eDay1. You can look at our agenda for today. Our agenda is going to be watching this video while taking notes. You can find the notes in your paper packet on page 20 to 21. Then you're going to complete the homework, which is a quiz review. It is page 18 to 19 in your paper packet, and also the last two questions on page 21. Just as a reminder, make sure you check your answers to your homework with the answer key posted, and I will be available for discussion or questions, and that will be via Zoom or just via email or Schoology from 11:30 to 2:30 on today, Monday, March 30th. Just a reminder that there is a quiz tomorrow. Looking at this, you can find in this folder the notes, the homework, and where to submit and go to your discussion board. But you also may take notes in your paper packet. Your paper packet will be on page 20. Everything we're doing here is a review, but I want to refresh you so you feel very prepared for tomorrow's quiz. Just as a reminder, for tomorrow when you take this quiz, you will need 50 minutes for the quiz, and it's one attempt only. You will not be able to go back to a question, so you need to be able to complete a question before you move on. That's why today's lesson is very important to feel prepared, so that way when you start taking your quiz, you will be able to complete it with the time allowed with one attempt. So first off, I want to review graphing parabolas. Just as a reminder, there's two different versions of how we graph. Whether they ask for 3 points with the focus and directrix, or they ask for 5 points. That would be using our pattern. This is our new version, 3 points, focus, and directrix. This is where we first find our vertex. I want you guys to be careful and make sure that you're taking the opposite of both, but when you write your ordered pair, it's always the x-coordinate first. So what is the opposite of -1? That would be +1. And the opposite of 4 is -4. But just remember the x goes with the x and the y goes with the y. Next, from here, we are going to look at the 4p value. Just as a reminder, how do you know when it is an a value versus a 4p? Remember, a 4p is on the non-squared side. And since this is on the non-squared side, we take that 8 and we set it equal to 4p. Remember, we do not need to worry about the negative. The negative has to do with direction, which we'll talk about next. If we solve for p, our p is 2. Before we start to graph, it's very important to think about what direction it is opening. And we asked ourselves a couple questions. The first question we asked ourselves was, what is being squared? And the second thing we asked ourselves, is it an A or 4p value? Is it positive or negative? And then we went from there. Looking at this problem, first off, is what is being squared? And what is being squared is our y. When our y is being squared and we have a negative sign, what direction would we open? And you're right, we are going to be opening to the left. So what I would first do is put in our vertex at 1, -4. We know it's going to be opening to the left, so I'm going to just do a little sketch as I'm remembering where my points go. Now our p value, who remembers what the p value is? Our p value is the distance from our vertex to both the focus and directrix. And refreshing you on vocabulary, what is the focus? Where does it lie? The focus always lies inside the parabola, and it's going to be 2 away from our vertex. So this is our focus. Our directrix is always a line, and it is, in this case, going to be a vertical line. And it's going to also be that distance of 2 away from our vertex. Now, how do we get more points? The way we get more points is we created this T. Do you guys remember the T? The T was from our focus to our directrix. That was a total units of 4. And so we went 1, 2, 3, 4 4 units in both directions from our focus. And that would get us the correct width for our parabola. So the T is really not there. Erasing too much here. So the T is really not there, but does help us guide and create the width of our parabola. So now that you have your picture made, it's going to be much easier to go back and answer these questions. The domain is going from negative infinity to 1. Our range is going to be negative infinity to infinity, and hopefully you feel very confident with those. As a reminder, the axis of symmetry is going to be cutting that graph in half, creating symmetry on either side. It goes through the vertex. And this is a visual. It does not have to be in your graph, versus the focus and directrix do need to be in your graph. But I like to draw it in to have our picture visual. This is a horizontal line. And how do you draw or write an equation of a horizontal line? And that is going to be y equals 4. The focus, remember, is always a point, and the directrix is a line. Please make sure that you're writing them correctly. A point, what is that ordered pair? It looks like it's negative 1, 4 for our focus. And our directrix, remember, is this red line here that I just highlighted in blue, and that is a vertical line. And how do you write the equation of a vertical line? The equation of a vertical line is going to be x equals 3. So this is your parabola asked for the focus and directrix and 3 points. The next one we're going to ask or graph is a parabola once again, but this time they're looking for 5 points. And whenever they say 5 points, we're thinking our pattern or our modified pattern. How do you know when you get to use your pattern? That is when A is 1. A modified pattern is where you take your A value of 1, but you're going to multiply it by whatever that A value is. Now, also another reminder would be your A value is on the squared side. And the way I remember that is if you go back to something you've always known, and that was the quadratic formula, it was ax squared plus bx plus c. And the way I remember that the A is on the squared side is A has always been with that squared side. All right, so looking at this equation, we could complete the square, which I think I'm going to have us do. Otherwise, you could find the vertex using opposite b over 2a. The only reason I do not suggest that is sometimes we have graphs that are going left and right versus up and down, and it gets a little confusing. So I do suggest that we complete the square. As a reminder for completing the square, let's try to isolate what we're working with. I always like to have we're completing the square with to be positive. So this one is a positive 2. That means we're going to go ahead and move the 3. We're going to move that 3 by subtracting it to the other side. And now who remembers how to complete the square from here? Do you see that there's a GCF? There is a GCF of a 2, so we're going to factor out the 2 before we continue completing the square. Our ultimate goal is to find out what number goes right here. In order to do that, we're going to take half of the middle number, which is negative 2, and then we square it. So negative 2 squared is 4. But the question then is, what do we add to the other side? We want to take that 4 and multiply it by 2, so we are going to be adding 8 to the other side. Let's go ahead and simplify this equation. It turns out to be y plus 5 equals 2x minus 2 quantity squared. We are now in a format that we're going to be able to graph it and name our vertex. This has an A value. Notice this is an A value. It's on the squared side. Has an A value of 2, so we're going to use our modified pattern. Our vertex, we're going to take the opposite of both. And the opposite of both would be my x value opposite is 2, and opposite of my y value is -5. Just make sure you put the x in the x spot and the y in the y. So let's first plot this to -5. And let's also now think about what direction it's going to be opening. And we ask ourselves the same questions we did up here. What is being squared? Is it an A or 4P? And then is it positive or negative? So looking at this, sorry, the dogs are starting to play. They're fighting over a bone. Sorry for the distraction. First, we're going to be graphing this. We want to think about the direction it's opening. Here we have our x squared, and it is positive. For it to be an x squared and positive, we need to think about the direction which will be opening up. If it's going to be opening up, sometimes it's helpful to kind of get a little sketch going. We are going to be using what's called a modified pattern, and the reason we're going to do a modified pattern is because we have an A value of 2. Now, as a reminder, our normal pattern, don't draw this, but our normal pattern would be up 1 over 1, because 1 squared is 1, and then 2 squared is 4, so we're going to go up 4 and over 2. Now, we're going to have to modify that. Instead of going up 1, we're going to have to go up a factor of 2. So our new one is going to be at up 1 and over 2. And then instead of going a factor, sorry, the dogs are totally barking. Instead of going up a factor of 4, so up 2 squared is 4, we are going to be going up 8 because we take that 4 and multiply by 2. 2, and then over 2. So think about your parent graph, which is 1 squared is 1 and 2 squared is 4, and take that 1 squared is 2, 1 squared is 1, and 2 squared is 4. Take those values and multiply by your A value. Our A value was 2, so now we're going to move 2 and 8. And so this is up 2, and this one is going to be up 8. Now that we have our graph drawn, we can go ahead and answer the rest of the questions. Our domain is -infinity to infinity. And then from here, we want to find our range. Our range is going to be our lowest point, and that lowest point is -5. And we use a bracket at -5 because it is our lowest point, and that point is included in our graph. So -5 to infinity. As a reminder, axis of symmetry is going to cut through our vertex, and this is a vertical line, and our vertical line would be written x equals 2. All right, now we're going to go on to writing equations of circles. I did not have us graph a circle. I think you're probably pretty confident. We could always complete the square on this one and try graphing it. For completing the square, it's great to organize yourself first. Find your x's, find your y's, and move everything else over. As we complete the square, let's leave a little space after our x's. We're going to write our y's and leave a little space, and then equals now a positive 10. So I'll give you guys a second to get yourself set up. And remember, you can pause this video at any time that I'm going too fast that you need to continue writing or continue graphing. Completing the square, first off, we're going to take half of -6, which is -3, and we square it, and when we square, we get 9. Remember, when you add 9 to one side, you always have to add it to the other side too. Then we're going to take half of 2. Half of 2 is 1, and 1 squared is 1. And we're going to add that to the other side. And we're going to finish simplifying this. We would write it as x minus 3 squared plus y minus 1 squared, and that adds all up to 20. Now be careful as you are answering questions on tomorrow's quiz. You want to always think about what they're asking. This first one is the center, and that should be easy. Take the opposite of both your x and y. So that would be 3, -1. Now, our formula, this is r squared. And if they're asking for the radius, we would want to take the square root. And if we take the square root of 20, how do we simplify the square root of 20? That would be 2√5. Do we need the plus or minus? No, because a radius is going to be a distance, which is always positive. Now, if the quiz tomorrow is asking for you to complete the equation, you would leave it as 20 because the equation is r squared. This would not be a good question to graph just because the radius is not a nice whole number. But remember, you would plot your center and just go northwest, north, south, east, west, in the direction, each of those 4 directions with the length of your radius. This next one could potentially be on your quiz. It says, write the equation of a circle in center radius form with the center and this -412 as your endpoint. Now, the only thing I really noticed on quizzes in the past is sometimes people plop things in the wrong places. So if they want our center, let's go ahead and first put in our center. Remember, as you're doing your center, it's always the opposite. So x plus 2 squared. Then we will have y minus 6 squared equals r squared. So first, go ahead and put in your center. Now, an endpoint means it goes through this point. We can plug in our x and our y in order to solve for the r squared. We're going to replace our x, and then we're going to replace our y. And let's go ahead and do that. Replacing your x with -4, and we continue writing. And then replace your y with 12 and continue writing. When you simplify this, this will help you find the r squared. -4 plus 2 is -2, and -2 squared is 4. 12 minus 6 is 6, and 6 squared is 36. And that means my r squared is 40. So they want us to write the equation. We're going to take this equation here, and we go back. We want to keep our we want to keep our center, and just replace the r squared. So we're going to keep our center, and then our r squared, remember this is saying the equation, so our r squared is 40. And this is where you need to read real carefully on what the question's asking. They're asking for the r, you take the square root. If they're asking for the equation or just for what to complete the equation. So always read carefully. The next one, if you remember from our notes when we first did it, we said that drawing a picture will be the easiest way. It says, write the equation of a circle in center radius form with center -1, 5 and tangent to the y-axis. So let's go ahead and graph -1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now tangent, if you remember, means that it touches. So if we wanted to touch the y-axis here, it's just going to touch and come around like this. And now if it touches the y-axis, what is my length of my radius? Here my radius is going to be a length of 1. Putting it in our equation then, we'll have x, take the opposite of your x-coordinate, which is +1. And then we're going to take the opposite of our y-coordinate. And our formula says r squared. If r is 1 and we square it, we still are at 1. Now, what if, let's just say, what if our problem changed? And our problem said, we don't want a tangent to the y-axis, but let's make it to the x-axis. If we had our center here at -1, 5, and we want to be tangent to the x-axis, what would our new radius be if we were to make a circle? Well, that doesn't look like a circle. Let me make a better circle. There we go. If we want to be tangent to the x-axis now, we would have to count how many in this direction, which is an r of 5. So just read carefully what they're asking in terms of which axis, and then draw a picture to help you find your radius. Now next we're going to work with writing equations of parabolas. This one is just completing the square, and they're telling you the format they want it in. First off, let's go ahead and move this 3 to the other side. So we're going to minus our 3. And then from here, we always want to factor out that GCF. So I'm going to do y minus 3. I'm going to factor out the 2. Now leave me with the 2 and leave some space. Our goal is to find out what goes right here. And to do that, we're going to take half of negative 2, which is 1, and 1 squared is 1. But what do we add to the other side? So remember, we're going to take 1 and we're going to multiply it by 2 to get 2. That is what we add to the other side. So we have y minus 1 equals 2, parenthesis x plus 1 squared. And, you know, they might ask you some questions. What is the vertex of this problem? The vertex would be negative 1, positive 1. Is the 2 an a value or a 4p value? It is an a value because it's on the squared side. That means they would ask you to graph 5 points, and it would be using a modified pattern. Now, focus and directrix, I found that making a graph is probably the most helpful. So if we were to graph negative 8, 5, it doesn't have to be completely accurate. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have negative 8, 5. And that is our focus. Then it tells us our directrix is x equals 4. So what does x equals 4 look like? Well, it's going to be a vertical line. Now, a key piece of information that we don't have right now is where our vertex is. Do you remember how to find the vertex? The vertex is halfway between your focus and your directrix. So if you know the height of it, it's going to be here, up here at your 5, but we got to find how far we are if we are from negative 8 to a positive 5. So let's see. That's negative 14 total length. I'm sorry, no. This is not a 5. That's why I was confused, sorry. This is, I don't know why it's not letting me erase. This is 4. My apologies. So that is 12. So we're going to be 6 units from both directions. And 6 would put us right around here at 2. And then we're going to be at the height of the focus. So our vertex halfway between is at negative 2 and a positive 5. Now, how can you tell what direction it's opening? Now, to find the direction that it's opening, we are going to be opening to the left. And the reason we open to the left is because the focus sits right inside of our parabola. If we're opening to the left, what is being squared? Well, we got our y being squared. And what else do you know? We know that that p-value has to be negative, or our 4p value. So what is our p-value? P-value is the distance from our vertex to either the focus or the directrix. It doesn't matter which way, they're the same length. And then our p-value, if you count that, our p-value is 6. So let's go ahead and start putting it into an equation. Sometimes I like to keep things simple first. So we're saying our y is being squared. And what side does our 4p go on? It always goes on the non-squared side, and then I have my x. Putting in now my vertex. Remember, y goes with the y. So the y value, the opposite is y minus 5. And then I have my 4p, and then x, opposite of negative 2, is a positive 2. Now, if we put in our p-value, which is 6, but we remember it has to be negative, we will have 4 times 6 is 24, but remember to make it negative because we want to show that the graph is opening to the left. Next one here. This says, write the equation of a parabola with vertex at 2, 3 and passing through the point. Well, there's 2 ways to do it. You can do it with an a value or a 4p value, and it really doesn't matter. The a value will cut a step for you, so I'm assuming you'll want to do it that way, and that's how we did in our notes. But if you did it with a 4P, that is fine too. The key though is to use the letter A if you're on the squared side, or 4P if you're on the non-squared side. Let's go ahead and start off with doing it on the square side. So if we have A is on the squared side, I kind of jumped ahead. How did I know it was a y squared? Well, I saw that it was opening to the left. So I'm like, oh, it has to be a y squared. In terms of left being negative, when you have it go through the point, that negative should automatically appear as you're solving for your A value. So you do not need to put it in right now. So if we have this equation now, let's go ahead and put in our vertex. So we'll have a y minus 3 squared equals x minus 2. And we can plop in our x and y ordered pairs. And our goal is to solve for our a. For our a, let's put our y as 6. And then our x would be negative 1. Solving, 6 minus 3 is 3, and 3 squared is 9. So I'm going to write 9a. And then on the other side, we have a negative 3. If we divide by this, we end up with a being a negative 1/3. Going ahead and putting it into our equation, we would have a negative 1/3 y minus 3 squared equals x minus 2. And you'll notice that your negative sign now appears, and that's why we know it opens left. If you were to do it with a 4p value, that would have been fine. Your equation would end up being the reciprocal, so you'd have a negative 3 on the non-squared side. We are not going to do the next problem. It's repetitive. But we can jump down to this last one we're going to do here. It says, write the equation of a parabola with vertex at 5, 0. So plotting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0. So plotting this point, then it tells us we have a directrix at y equals 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oops, wrong direction. Y equals 6 will be up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And y equals 6 is going to be our horizontal line. What does this tell you, knowing where our directrix is? Well, it tells us that our graph is going to be opening down. It also will tell us the length of our p-value. So the length of our p-value, if we count from our vertex up 6, our p-value is 6. And knowing that the graph opens down, the question is, what is being squared? That means our x is being squared. So we're going to put our 4py on the other side. It's opening down, so we'll have to make sure we put in our negative. Next, we can put in the vertex, so we'll have x minus 5 squared. And then instead of writing minus 0, you can just keep it as your y, so 4py. Our p-value is 6. We can put in our 6 here, but remember it needs to be negative, so we're going to multiply 4 by 6 and make it negative to be a negative 24. The next two problems I'm asking you to complete for homework. This will help you for your quiz review. Please look back at your notes for examples on those two. So let me just review real quickly. Tomorrow is a quiz. It is on Schoology. And when you go to Schoology for day 2, you're going to find your quiz. When you look at your quiz, it's going to have some directions for you. And the directions, you have one attempt, and you have 50 minutes to complete. You are not allowed to resume it. And you're not allowed to go back and edit a question or look at a question. So very important that you are prepared. You want to have this quiz review done. This quiz review that I'm doing in notes and also the quiz review you're doing for homework are not always complete. I highly suggest that you go back and relook at your guided notes and be fully prepared to take the quiz. You'll have the 50 minutes to complete. You have to complete a question in order to continue on. And I am available tomorrow to answer, or today, Monday, to answer questions before you take your quiz. I can also answer questions on Tuesday before you take your quiz. Just make sure that you are fully prepared for it. Great job today, and let me know if you have any questions. The best way to ask questions, because I will get bogged down with questions and it'd be easier to answer one time to everybody, is to put them on that question board. So here you can add a question to your, you can add whatever question you want, you can add a comment, and that way when I reply, I can reply to everyone and everyone will see it. So please do not email me individual questions. You can ask questions either via Zoom or on the discussion board. That way I can reach more students when I do answer a question. Instead of answering 85 individual questions, I can answer it once and people can look at that response. So hopefully this helps and it's nice and organized. You can do your homework on the paper copy of Otherwise, you can do it on here in Schoology. You can pull up the same thing as your paper copy and do your homework. I also have the answer key. As always, it's very important before you submit that you check your answers. Please do not rely on the answers. That will give you a false sense of security. I want you to do your quiz review, study, prepare, check your answers, make sure you have everything right and understand before continuing on to tomorrow's quiz.